Imagine a city, not just a city, a living organism where every movement matters, where thousands of people breathe in the same rhythm. Now imagine that this city does not stand on land. It sails, lonely, majestic, surrounded by water for thousands of miles in every direction. In the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, where the horizon meets the sky, moves a giant equal in scale to a small nation. Its heart is made of steel, its nervous system of cables and reactors, and its strength lies in the people who live and work inside. This is the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest and most advanced floating city ever built by humans. More than 4,500 Marines, sailors, and aviators call it their home, a home that is never still. Today we will embark on a journey to a place where ordinary life sounds different, where sleep is a luxury, food is a logistical operation on the scale of a megapolis, and every shift carries a responsibility on which the security of an entire country depends. You will see how everyday life is arranged for those who spend months far from land, how the people who operate this city ship live, train, rest, and work. Fasten your seatbelts. We are diving into a world hidden behind the steel walls of a mega machine, a world of discipline, engineering, and human resilience, the world of an aircraft carrier. My name is Jonathan Hale, and it must have been fate itself that decided to grant me the chance to see something most people can't even imagine when they hear the word ship. I stood on the aft superstructure, gazing into the boundless Pacific horizon, and couldn't help thinking that beneath my feet stretched not just an artificial island woven from steel, wiring, and roaring mechanisms, but a true urban organism, complex, alive, pulsing with its own rhythm. It felt as though I were standing on a cliff floating among the waves, and beneath it lay a whole world comparable in scale to a small American city, yet without the familiar roads, parks, intersections, and bustling streets. Everything here was gathered into one colossal hull worth an incredible $13 billion. I had always considered myself a person capable of being amazed, but what I saw went beyond any experience I had known. Imagine a city-state the size of a considerable urban district, completely isolated from the world, and yet existing not on land but in the middle of a bottomless ocean, where water surrounds you for hundreds of miles in every direction, as if nature itself had decided to test the strength of human will. That is exactly the type of floating island I found myself on. Among more than 4,000 people who are not here to rest, travel, or seek adventure, but to work around the clock, performing one of the most dangerous and demanding professions on Earth. When I first descended to the hangar deck, accompanied by the muffled echo of my own footsteps, I felt a slight tremor rise within me. Somewhere above my head, in the relentless hum of metal, life surged. 5,000 people lived within a tight web of corridors and compartments, working in conditions where every hour was scheduled with mathematical precision, eating 18,000 servings of hot food per day, and sleeping in cabins smaller than prison cells in ordinary American jails. And all this, amid the staggering power of weapons many consider the most destructive ever created by humankind. I asked myself, how is it possible for 5,000 souls to exist for months in such isolation, seeing neither shores nor any signs of the world except the endless movement of water? And the deeper I ventured into this metallic labyrinth, the more clearly I understood. Reality exceeded any assumption. The USS Gerald R. Ford was not just a vessel. It was a city where every inhabitant was both a worker and a guardian of order, and a part of a colossal mechanism that has no right to slow down or stop. Those who first hear about it are astonished by its size. But once inside, you suddenly perceive the scale differently, not in numbers but in sensations. 1,500 feet of length turn into endless routes connected by passageways, stairwells, shafts, and technical spaces where the air vibrates from constant labor. More than 100,000 tons of displacement are felt not as mass, but as steady certainty, as though the ocean itself acknowledges the ship's might and dares not resist its movement. And yet what amazed me most was that this giant could spend weeks or even months without seeing a single port, slicing through the infinite sea with a speed unimaginable for a structure of such magnitude. 90 days of complete autonomy. It sounded almost like a legend, but one backed by engineering precision and human discipline. Every time we went up to the mess hall, I witnessed wonders of their own kind. The enormous galleys worked non-stop, day and night, without pauses or breaks, like an organism that has no right to stop. They fed all of us, thousands of men and women constantly in motion, producing 18,000 meals a day. And not just meals for sustenance. Many could have graced the tables of fine restaurants. It is hard to imagine that in the middle of the ocean, people eat fresh bread baked, right here in huge ovens that never know silence. People often asked me, is it possible to create a sense of home on a ship? At first, I would have said no. But looking back now, I understand. Every sailor has their own corner, their tiny shelf, their photos and letters. The little things that turn a cramped space not just into a place to sleep, but into a small island of personal world within the steel giant. Yet it wasn't only the everyday life that amazed me. What happened on the deck, the very place where aircraft rose like enormous steel birds, inspired not fear, but awe. Here, in this confined space where the relentless ocean breathes beneath the hull and the roar of jet engines tears the air apart, dozens of young people worked, each wearing a brightly colored vest, each a part of a delicate choreography in which mistakes are unacceptable. Yellow shirts guided directions, blue ones held heavy chains, red and purple managed fuel and weapons, green oversaw the power of catapults and arresting systems. Their movements were precise, honed, almost musical, also that massive aircraft could launch every few minutes and then return as if performing ritual circles above the water. I remember my first morning when I had the chance to look into the depths of the ship, where the nuclear reactors, the heart of this steel colossus, were hidden. Descending through narrow shafts, feeling the cold metal railings under my hands, I understood that I was going to a place open only to those who carry on their shoulders a responsibility so immense that an ordinary person would find it unbearable. Here, among pipes, consoles, and blinking lights, served sailors who had undergone almost 2 years of training. Their faces were calm, focused. They seemed to be people of a special caliber, those capable of working where a mistake equals catastrophe. And yet they radiated confidence, as though the very space around them yielded to their mastery. These massive reactors, hidden deep within the hull, created not only the ship's movement. They powered the light in every corridor, sustained hundreds of systems, and produced the water that allowed us to drink, cook, and clean ourselves after long shifts. It amazed me that the Gerald R. Ford produces hundreds of thousands of gallons of the purest water every day, cleaner than what one often finds even in peaceful homes on land. The water was constantly filtered through complex systems, and it felt as though the ocean itself, with all its harshness, was forced to yield to humanity, to give life where it is so difficult to sustain. As I walked through the engineering compartments, listening to the steady hum of pumps and the vibration of pipes, I thought about the colossal work hidden beneath the ship's surface. We see only the top layer, the deck, the people, the roar of aircraft. But this entire unseen world is like an underground city where everything boils, moves, and lives its intense life. Here there is no right to error, no room for relaxation or doubt. Every detail, every bolt matters. But the deeper I delved into the ship's inner workings, the clearer it became. Food, water, electricity. These are only a small part of what makes this floating city complete. The issue of the next day is waste, and the word sounds far more mundane than the enormity of the work associated with it. I saw for the first time how specially trained teams operated massive presses that crush garbage and systems that burned what could not be disposed of otherwise. Everything on the ship, everything left behind by 5,000 people, must be processed with precision and safety. Even food waste is not simply thrown away. No, it goes through its own procedure before disappearing into the ocean depths without disturbing nature's delicate balance. Thinking about this, I again reflected. How much is hidden from the eyes here, and how much effort it takes to keep the ship what it is: a home, a fortress, a workstation, a life-saving island amid raging waters. And yet, what always amazed me most was the medical care. From childhood, I had kept a simple image of a ship's doctor: a small wing, a few beds, a cramped office. But what I saw on board forever erased those naive memories. Before me was a full-fledged hospital capable of handling almost everything, from ordinary colds to the most complex surgeries that elsewhere are performed only in large city medical centers. Surgical rooms, x-ray facilities, dentistry, intensive care units, all of this hidden within metal corridors resembled a true medical center. I was in awe of how the doctors and nurses, carrying immense responsibility, maintained their composure. They knew how to act quickly, clearly, and tactfully, understanding that sometimes an airstrike mission could end in injury, that sometimes a young pilot might need help mere seconds after returning. I heard stories of how heart surgeries had been performed here while the ship sped through restless waters, and it seemed impossible to imagine how surgeons kept their hands steady while the hull shuddered from waves. But even with all this technology, equipment, and training, the human soul remained just as important. Distance from land, from family, from familiar life could be eased only by the threads of connection made possible by modern communications. I saw young sailors who, after coming off shift, rushed to a computer to hear their mother's voice. Men whose eyes softened only when they could see their children for a moment. Women smiling as they listened to quiet words carried across thousands of miles. I understood that only a few decades ago, these people might have been allowed a single brief call home during the entire deployment. Now, thanks to technological progress, a thin but steady digital bridge connected the ocean to their homes. Sometimes, sitting in a narrow steel chair in a quiet corner of the ship's library, I reflected on how much significance a simple conversation can hold. Here, where there are no trees, no rustling leaves, no city noise, no familiar sounds of the world, a human voice, distant but dear, becomes salvation, like a soft light in the night. But the ocean is not a place where calm lasts forever. I saw peaceful days turn suddenly turbulent, with enormous waves rising like walls around us. And then the ship, still confident, still powerful, began to sway. Yet its construction, like a finely tuned instrument, endured nature's assault. Storms that would force smaller vessels to seek shelter could not stop this steel city. Sometimes flights were indeed suspended, but the ship's life never ceased for a minute. Thousands of people continued their work, continued to eat, sleep, and prepare for new tasks. And in those moments, I felt most strongly the power of humanity, the inner resilience that allows us to stand against the sea. Navigation and control of this giant seemed something akin to art. On the bridge, surrounded by instruments, screens, and charts, worked people who seemed to feel the ocean through their skin. They read the weather, anticipated the movements of other ships, and knew where danger might lurk. I watched them for hours, amazed at how calmly, unhurriedly, and confidently they guided a 100,000-ton colossus across countless miles of sea. But even this highest level of expertise didn't cancel the daily routine. Technical maintenance never stopped. I saw young specialists who, from early morning until late at night, checked components, serviced equipment, listened for the slightest deviations in the noise of the mechanisms. Every screw, every panel, every system mattered because no one could imagine a situation in which the ship would stop because of a small flaw. A crew of 5,000 cannot rely on chance. And yet, despite the constant labor, despite the roar of jet engines, the hum of machinery, and the endless hustle, the ship knew how to preserve silence. Not external silence, no. That is impossible where thousands of tons of metal and hundreds of running systems lie beneath your feet. But an inner silence, one you can find only in rare moments when you are alone in a long, dimly lit corridor. I remember those evenings, the air trembling from the low rumble of the reactors, the steel walls reflecting the faint glow of the lamps, and somewhere far, Far away, the steady sound of fans working. And still, I felt as though I were standing in a vast temple built by people certain of their purpose. Once, I went up to the flight deck late in the evening. The sky was deep, dark blue, as if soaked with salt and damp wind. Huge floodlights cut through the darkness, turning the deck into a space where every step felt like part of a complex ceremony. In the distance, at the very edge, a few sailors in purple and green vests were preparing fuel and catapults for night launches. And a little farther away stood the pilots, young, determined, with that look a person gets when they know the value of every second in the sky. I watched as an aircraft rolled forward, as the blades of air from its engines struck my chest like an invisible wave. Then the sound rose, howling like a beast awakened from a long sleep, and the machine, trembling, vanished into the ink-black emptiness of night. And in that instant I thought, each of these people entrusts their life to the ship. Each believes the crew will not make a mistake, that the catapult will fire flawlessly, that the rough-painted deck will hold, that the arresting wires will catch them when they return from their mission. Strangely enough, it was in these moments that I understood that in each of us lived not only fear, but pride. Pride in the fact that we can build such machines. Pride in the fact that we can work together. Pride in the fact that in the middle of a raging ocean, we can create our own island of light, warmth, and order. Sometimes we spent hours in the hangar, where dozens of aircraft stood like enormous sleeping predators. There, under a roof shielding the machines from sun, rain, and storms, I felt the greatness of this ship most strongly. The hangar seemed like a separate world, huge, multi-leveled, with elevators capable of lifting a many-ton aircraft as easily as a person lifts a book. People in brightly colored vests worked silently, focused. The machinery bounced gently on its struts when moved, like living creatures being prepared for awakening. But behind all this stood another trial: heat and cold. The temperature in different parts of the ship varied so sharply it felt as though you were stepping from one climate into another. First, you descended into the engine room, where the air was so hot it felt like breathing through thick cloth. Then you climbed to the upper levels, where night and ocean wind cut to the bone. The ship was like a set of contrasts fused into a whole: light and darkness, noise and silence, heat and icy drafts, life and danger. And yet, among all these challenges, there was one place I grew to love especially: the ship's laundry. Yes, it sounds strange. What could be special about a room where uniforms are washed? But stepping inside late in the evening, when the machines were still running and the duty crew neatly sorted stacks of clothing, I felt an unexpected calm. White clouds of steam curled in the air like soft mist. The smell of clean linen reminded me of home, of a peaceful life, of the world beyond the ocean where people fall asleep on soft sheets without thinking about shifts or alarms. And perhaps it was these little things that made the ship alive. Not the aircraft, not the gigantic engines, not the steel might, but the people. People who smiled at each other, helped one another, joked, shared candy, baked cakes for birthdays, brought hot coffee to a friend standing night watch. People who turned the metal giant into a home. But no matter how much warmth existed here, the ocean never let us forget where we were. Sometimes I stepped out onto the deck in the evening, when the sun sank below the horizon, and saw how the ship sliced through enormous swells, leaving a long trail of white foam behind. And then I understood. We were just a tiny point amid a vast, untamed force, but a point that held on, moved forward, and refused to give up. And then one day, we went through a truly powerful storm. The waves rose so high it seemed they were about to swallow the ship whole. The wind howled as if trying to tear the metal apart. Water washed over the deck, and even the massive anchor chains stretched tight like strings. But the ship held. Its hull emitted long, metallic groans as though it were sighing, but it did not yield. And that night, I understood fully. Human beings can build a fortress capable of withstanding nature's fury. And in the morning, when the sun once again lit the deck with golden light, I stepped outside and saw the sailors, as if nothing had happened, beginning their usual day again. It was one of those scenes impossible to forget. Life went on. After the storm, the ship seemed to gain a new breath. People returned to their tasks with the same trained concentration, but in their eyes one could notice something more, an exceptional unity that appears only when everyone has gone through a trial together. As I walked across the deck, I saw the sun playing on the wet metal, the water that had raged only hours before now calmly draining away. And in that contrast between yesterday's chaos and today's measured routine, I felt that strange beauty only the sea can give. With each passing day, I understood more deeply how multi-layered life on the ship truly was. It consisted of hundreds of separate micro-worlds, each operating by its own rules and yet closely tied to all the others. Take the storage compartments, the very ones where a casual visitor rarely ends up. I remember the first time I found myself there. Long rows of boxes, containers, and pallets neatly arranged on shelves. Each had labels, barcodes, numbers. The people working there knew the location of every item, as if an internal navigator had been built into their minds. They could determine in seconds where any part was, whether it was a bolt for a catapult, a medical kit, or an ordinary light bulb. I was struck by how precisely the supply system was organized. In the isolation of the ocean, you cannot afford the luxury of forgetting or losing anything. Every shipment, every restock, every box is worth its weight in gold. There was no room for randomness, and I thought, if logistics on land worked this smoothly, the world would be a much calmer place. Even more impressive were the people who maintained the aircraft. I spent enough time with them to see the phenomenal memory they possessed. They knew every mechanism of the jet, every nut, every wire. They could identify a problem by a barely perceptible sound, a short vibration, a faint shadow under the wing. It was an almost supernatural attentiveness that could come only from years of work. One morning, I witnessed them preparing a fighter jet for another launch. A young technician, barely 23, walked around the aircraft with a tablet in hand, calmly checking each item. I asked if he was afraid of making a mistake. He smiled, quietly, confidently. "Here," he said, "you don't have time to be afraid. You just know what you need to do. Think 2 steps ahead and trust your team." That phrase stayed with me because it reflected the essence of the entire ship. But perhaps nothing struck me more than the first time I watched aircraft land from the very edge of the deck. At a safe distance, of course, but close enough to feel the power of what was happening. The jet approached, descending like a predatory bird ready to skim the surface of the water. At the last moment it leveled out, the landing gear touched the deck softly, and then a sharp jolt. The hook caught the cable, metal rang, and the aircraft stopped in mere seconds, though just moments before it had been moving at terrifying speed. Sound enveloped everything. The air vibrated, and the sailors nearby, like actors, flawlessly played their parts in this dangerous choreography. In that moment, I felt sharply how every action on the ship demanded precision. Here, people quite literally entrusted their lives to one another. Confidence came from discipline, discipline from experience, and experience from the immense responsibility each person carried. Sometimes, to step away from all that metal grandeur, I went down into the living quarters. Life there moved a little more quietly. Tiny cabins, where 3 or 4 people lived shoulder to shoulder, were filled with personal little things. Photographs, postcards, plush toys, soft cover books. These miniature islands of personal space were touching. In them lay the human side of service. Homesickness, dreams of the future, moments of joy shared even in the hardest conditions. Once I witnessed sailors celebrating a crewmate's birthday. They decorated the mess hall with improvised paper garlands. A galley-baked cake stood at the center of the table. And for a moment, it seemed we weren't on a steel giant in the middle of the ocean, but in an ordinary American cafeteria. People laughed, raised cups of soda, shared stories. And in that moment, I realized that human warmth can soften even the coldest walls. Of course, there were tense moments too. Life in constant readiness sometimes left its mark on people's tempers. The crew lived in tight quarters, under pressure of duty and schedules. Sometimes they argued, sometimes loudly. But what amazed me was how quickly conflicts were resolved. Everyone understood that quarreling was a luxury no one could afford. On a ship, everyone is bound by a common purpose, and any discord can become a threat. So people learn to restrain emotions, find compromises, listen to each other. It was a great school of human interaction, and watching it taught me much. What struck me most was the sense of mutual support. I saw sailors helping one another with everything, from heavy work in the engine rooms to simple, everyday tasks. One brought headache medicine to his bunkmate. Another shared his last pack of cookies. A third helped fix a uniform or sew on a torn patch. On land, such gestures may seem small, almost invisible, but here they had special value. They showed that even under constant pressure, a person remains a person. And yet there were moments when I felt the mystery of this place. Sometimes at night, when the ship sped through calm waters, I walked to the stern and watched the long white trail stretching behind us for miles. It shimmered in the moonlight like a path leading into another dimension. The wind tugged at my collar, salty spray brushed my face, and somewhere far off the night murmured softly. In those moments, I felt a strange mixture of solitude and freedom. You feel small, yet part of something grand. Human history, engineering, courage. And then came the feeling that this ship is not just a steel city. It is the embodiment of humanity's dream of strength, of unity, of the ability to move forward even when the whole world around is nothing but dark water and an endless horizon. Weeks passed. I absorbed the life of the ship more and more deeply, as if it were a living creature slowly revealing its secrets to me. And one day I realized its greatest secret lay not in the catapults, not in the reactors, not in the vast decks. It lay in the people whose strength of spirit kept this giant machine afloat. The last day of my stay on board was approaching. I caught myself walking through the familiar corridors more slowly than usual, as if trying to remember every sound, every vibration underfoot, every smell, from the scent of welding in the repair bay to the warm notes of fresh bread drifting from the galley. All of it had become a part of me, and I didn't want to let go of the sense of confidence the ship had given me. In the morning, I went up to the deck, where a soft, warm wind was blowing. The sun was rising slowly, tinting the horizon with amber hues. The air was unbelievably calm, as if the ocean that could have swallowed you whole yesterday had decided today to offer a farewell touch. I stood by the rail, looking at the endless line of water, and I understood. This ship would always remain part of my memory. Suddenly, the XO approached me, a tall, lean man in his 50s. We had crossed paths many times, and I had always noticed his calmness, that particular confidence of people who have spent their whole lives among steel and sea winds. "Leaving today, Jonathan?" he asked, squinting slightly at the light. "Yes. Although, to be honest, it feels like I'm walking away from something important," I replied. He smiled with just the corners of his mouth, a very seaman-like, almost invisible smile. It's always like that. When a person comes here for the first time, it seems to him that he's looking at a machine. But if he understands that it's not a machine, but people, then it's always hard for him to leave. I nodded silently, because he had spoken the exact truth. We stood side by side, looking at the calm ocean, and then he added, "You know what the secret is? This ship is like any city, only it's more honest. There's no room for illusions here. You always see who you can rely on, and you see who stands beside you when the storm begins." His words echoed in my mind for a long time, probably because during those weeks I realized, in a world where so much seems fragile and temporary, there are things that endure thanks to human responsibility, trust, and mutual support. When a moment came to leave the ship, I walked once more through the hangars, past the elevators, along the endless corridors. In every compartment, I heard voices, footsteps, laughter, commands, the living rhythm of that steel heart. People waved to me. Someone joked, someone wished me safe travels. And I caught their eyes and thought that I might never again find a place where strangers became a part of your life so quickly. We boarded the small boat. The engines hummed softly, and the metal giant began to recede. I watched Gerald R. fort rise above the water like a huge steel continent. Its deck gleamed in the sunlight. Aircraft rested, ready for their next flights. Somewhere inside, thousands of people were beginning another shift. And then, at a distance, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Far away, in the gentle haze of ocean air, the ship no longer looked like a massive machine, but something almost majestic, a symbol of human determination, knowledge, and courage. I understood that its strength was not in its tonnage, not in billions of dollars, not in the length of its deck. Its strength was in the people who, day after day, year after year, kept this city alive and moving. And suddenly I felt clearly, as long as there are such people in the world, as long as they continue to stand shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the sea, humanity still has something to hope for. The boat carried me toward the horizon, and the ship grew smaller and smaller. But inside, in my memory, it remained enormous. I knew that somewhere beyond the waves, it continued on its course. And with it, thousands of stories, thousands of fates, thousands of lives bound by a shared duty. And I, too, became a part of that story, if only for a moment. But sometimes one moment changes the way you see the entire world. Thank you for walking with us into the heart of this incredible floating city. If this story resonated with you, support the channel. There is still much ahead that makes our peaceful life possible. See you next time.